Previously on Bullshit Artists.
And there was Dennis and Al, and sometimes Mason would join us down there, and we were creative, we were young, we were so high on cocaine, it was great. Jethro Spivey was a fiction. Dennis created him first. Al just picked up the mantle and ran with it.
He used to come down there with a fella named Al, and another guy used to come in there with him. A guy named after the jar.
Oh, Mason.
Mason, yeah, Mason Jurgen. Mason Jurgen. The Rotunda Club was awesome. But it was a stereotype, you expected to see a Cuban guy with a medallion on selling coke in the corner. And he did. And his name was Jose. And we loved him.
Dennis K. and Al Russo. They met in Baton Rouge in 1976, fell for each other, and eventually both settled in the New York area. Dennis tells Al about his plans to use a pen name, Jethro Spivey, and both eventually wind up using this name to publish works. Dennis leaves Al in 1980, moves back to Baton Rouge, and eventually to Arizona, which is where our investigation is currently headed. But before we get back to Dennis, and we will, what about Al Russo? How does he fit into the greater Jethro Spivey mosaic? And what was he doing between the years 1980 and his death from cancer in 1993? We're going to find out in this episode. I'm Scott Gordon, and this is Bullshit Artists.
Did I mention that we were really high on cocaine?
You mentioned several times, actually.
Well, we were. It was plentiful, to put it mildly, and I was like that aardvark in those Pink Panther cartoons, just snorting it up like a vacuum cleaner, honey. Like, you drop some coke on the floor, don't sweat it. I'm on it. Lorna's got it. You know what I'm saying?
That's Lorna Pettigrew recalling her days at the Rotunda Dance Club in the late 70s with Dennis and Al.
It was like my fuel for the dance floor.
Right.
Ooga chaka. I was all up in it, and it was all up in me. Ooh, now.
Okay. Well, but Lorna, you were already in a lot of plays by the time, you'd worked in the theater for a while by the time you met Dennis and Al, is that right?
That's right. I was an established actress in the theater scene. I acted, my pinnacle was the plays that I did with Mason.
Mason Jurgen.
Right, Mason Jurgen, and he was such a sweetheart.
Were you guys ever romantically involved?
No, never. Mason was as gay as a $2 bill, honey. Didn't want to have a thing to do with me. He and Al, though, probably did the nasty.
But I thought Al and Dennis were...
That's right, but after Dennis left, I believe that Mason and Al bumped uglies, if that's the term. Anyway, but Mason was much older than us. He had already been he was an established playwright, and his career began years earlier in the early 70s. His first big play was in 1972, Homo City. It was huge and started the whole gay theater explosion of the mid-70s.
And now you were in some of Mason's plays, right?
That's right, I was in a lot of Mason's plays. I was in The Life and Death of Paul Cord. He had a play in 1975 that I had a bit part in called How to Be a Successful Gay Man in New York City. It was a huge hit. Monstrous. Mink Straitjacket. The Price of Infamy. Take It Down a Notch. Art Gallery Hobo. Irony's Final Dance, The Cowboys of the Upper East Side, and that was one of the ones that was optioned into a film, along with Mink Straitjacket, which never got made, but you remember The Cowboys of the Upper East Side?
Yeah, it was nominated for Best Picture.
Right, and James Woods was so good in that. Oh my god. You wouldn't have guessed he was a flaming conservative jackass. Worm Burner, Achilles in Reverse, and Moonbeam Sally's Little Shop of Everything, which I thought was hilarious.
So Lorna proceeds to trail off into a laundry list of Mason Jergen's greatest plays. But I'm still reeling from the fact that apparently Mason and Al were romantically involved. This is the first time I've heard of this, and so I try to steer Lorna back to the personal side of Mason, and in particular, how I might be able to get in touch with him. I haven't had much luck raising him on the phone.
Mason and I were very good friends, but he doesn't keep in touch with the little people anymore. Ever since Hollywood came calling, he's just off in his own world, doing his own thing. And I thought we were super close, but apparently when you peel back the onion layers, well, it's stinky enough to make you cry, honey. He's an asshole. Just like all of them. Well, not all of them, but most of them. He just doesn't have to walk through the muck with the rest of us anymore. He's a millionaire. He's living in his mansion, presumably on a high hill, drinking whatever rich people drink. I'd like to think that it's Icelandic vodka filtered through some sort of polar bear cave or something. And he doesn't need to take our calls. God knows I've tried. I've called and been like, "Hello, Mason, it's Lorna," and talked for hours on end, and then realized I was talking to a recording. It's sad. Not me, just the state of things in general. Well, I might be a little sad. Russian vodka is all I can afford, honey.
It's true, Mason Jergen is an incredibly difficult person to raise on the phone. I've left about a dozen or so messages with his service, messages with his agent, what have you, but I've never heard back from him. Now, I don't know whether Lorna somehow got in touch with him or whether Mason had just this miraculous and coincidental change of heart, but the following morning, this message was on my answering machine.
Hello, this is Mason Jerkin, calling for Scott Gordon. I understand you've been asking around about me, and would like information relating to Jethro Spivey, and specifically how it relates to Dennis Kay and Al Russo. I may have the information that you require. If you would like to table a date for an interview, please call my secretary at the following number, 901.
I was floored when I got this message. The hugeness of this can't possibly be overstated. I'd been trying to get in touch with Mason Jergen for over 4 months at this point. I'd given up all hope on ever hearing from the man. In stories like this, he's the proverbial big fish you hear about. Someone with stature, with credibility, and someone who was there for some of these very intimate moments. He could illuminate a lot of the dark corners of this story. So I was a little nervous, but damn right I was going to call his secretary and set up an interview.
Hello, this is Mason.
Hi, Mr. Jergen. This is Scott Gordon calling. How are you today?
Oh, hello. I understand that you're doing a podcast investigating the whereabouts of Jethro Spivey.
That's right.
How's that going for you?
Well, to be honest, not very well. I'm having trouble locating anything on the man. I was actually hoping that maybe you might know something you'd like to share.
I may.
Did you know Dennis Kay or Al Russo?
I did know Dennis Kay, and I knew Al Russo quite well. Dennis left Al Russo to rot in New York City. A young boy, didn't know who to turn to or where to go. I took him under my wing.
And this was in
The
1980?
year was 1980. Dennis K. abandoned his lover and best friend, Al Russo, for the swampy plains of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He wanted to get away from people. Dennis never had the capacity for human interaction. He didn't care for human beings. He was disgusted by human beings. He wanted to be, quote, left alone,
Did he ever...
unquote.
Sorry.
That is a direct, you can quote me on that. That is a direct quote from Dennis K. He left his lover and best friend in the streets. Maybe not actually the streets, but the metaphorical streets of Union City, New Jersey. Al Russo had no friends. He had no idea how to make a living. He was coasting by on borrowed rent and half promises. He got in trouble with his landlord and had to leave. I gave him a place to stay.
So Al did live with you? There's some speculation that the nature of your relationship was...
Yes, he did live with me, and no, it was not sexual.
Help me understand what the nature of your relationship with Al Russo was.
He had been writing poems for a number of months and wanted an outlet to publish them. He had no idea how to do it, and so I gave him some advice, took him under my wing, if you will, and gave him the numbers and names of some publishers that I thought would be amenable to his verse. I also gave him the advice that he should use the pen name Jethro Spivey for his poetry.
So there it was. Finally, a first-hand, verifiable account of Al Russo using the pen name Jethro Spivey. But Mason just said it was for his poetry. He didn't say anything about plays. And I was just about to ask Mason about this when he continues.
I felt it was fair game. Dennis had no corner on the pen name market, and besides, he told him about it and sent young Al into the lion's den of Junior Mint Press, that savage Stan Roth, and told him to...
Wait a minute, Mason. You're telling me that Dennis K. used Al Russo as his, face man to publish?
Yes.
Well, you're going to have to walk this back a little bit for me. What exactly was the deal here?
Dennis did not like people. Have I not mentioned this? So he sends young Al Russo in 1979 into the publisher's offices with his manuscript. Stan Roth just happened to be the idiot who took it. I'm no Jethro Spivey apologist. I hate those plays.
So how many of the Jethro Spivey plays, if any, did Al write?
Al never wrote a play in his life. He was strictly a poet. The heart of a poet, the soul of a poet. He would have been a punk rock musician had he had the wherewithal to learn an instrument, but he had the soul of a poet. He wrote verse, beautiful verse, well, disgusting verse if you must. Al was a mimic. He mimicked the punk rock poets of his day, and he mimicked Dennis's style as Jethro Spivey would have it.
But he didn't... Okay, so Al didn't write any of the plays, but he was the face of Jethro Spivey. I'm still trying to figure out exactly, how long did Al...
Al portrayed the role of Jethro Spivey when submitting Dennis's plays. It just so happens that the Neanderthal Stan Roth accepted the first manuscript, and the rest was history. He published with them for another 10 years, I believe. But mostly via mail correspondence, and that's one of the reasons why Dennis left the city, because he didn't need to be there anymore. He had a contract. But yes, I believe Stan Roth thought that Al was the face of Jethro Spivey, if you will. So that's understandable why he would think that. But I don't believe, except maybe for one more meeting to finalize the deal, when Al went into Stanroth's office to sign the papers, if you will. And he signed his life away. Well, he signed the life of a fictional character, Jethro Spivey, away. Strange how things work in the literary world, wouldn't you say?
Most definitely.
This whole Banksy debacle in the art world is similar to this. Who is he? Where does he come from? Where will he appear again? We love the Jethro Spivey myth, even though I hated the writings and the style. It was disgusting. I sought to rectify that later, though.
Really? How so?
With Al's death.
Did you have anything to do with Al's death? I thought he died of cancer.
No, I didn't have anything to do with Al's death. I loved the man. He was like a son to me.
Were you around during his death? Can you give us any kind of an idea of what that situation was like?
The short story is Al developed cancer in 1990. He moved to New Orleans to see some specialists down there and to be a little closer to home. He knew the end was near. He didn't know he would linger on for 3 more years. As it turns out, 1990 was the same year that Dennis published the Ass trilogy of plays and took some time off. Some say he heard about Al's sickness and it rattled him, but I don't believe Dennis had a compassionate bone in his body. I cared for Al, visiting him in New Orleans from time to time, but he was beyond the reach of science, of compassion, of love. His poetry petered out that year. I believe 1991 or 92 was the last poem he published as Jethro Spivey.
Interesting. But Spivey's poetry continued well into the 2000s. Do you have any idea who might have been continuing the writing?
Yes, I do. 'Twas I.
Oh.
Yes. I picked up the Jethro Spivey mantle in 1995. I saw that Dennis had begun writing plays again. Apparently his grief period was over. So I began publishing poetry under the moniker Jethro Spivey. It was a perfect subterfuge for my poetic aspirations. I didn't want anyone to think that the mighty Mason Jergen would stoop to writing verse. But the Jethro Spivey name, why not? Why not get on that train and ride that caboose? So I would send him to various publishers, and I seriously doubt that the poetry publishers would cross-reference their addresses with playwright publishers. The 2 completely different worlds. So no one knew that the Jethro Spivey living in Baton Rouge was different than the Jethro Spivey living in New York City.
So why did you stop?
When Dennis, for whatever reason, stopped publishing in 2003, I decided to follow suit and withdrew all my poetry that I had scheduled for that year.
What happened to Dennis? Why did he quit?
I don't know what happened to Dennis. I don't think he passed away. We would have heard something from someone.
What if you didn't hear anything?
Well, I would have sensed it. There would have been a disturbance in the force.
I asked Mason what he thinks about critics such as Jarvis Hilton and Nathaniel Jordan, noticing a distinct departure in Jethro Spivey's tone and style and content after he took over the mantle.
There was a lot of talk after I took over for Jethro Spivey. Well, sat in, whatever you want to call it. When I began writing under the name Jethro Spivey, that the style changed, and there was some critical backlash that, quite frankly, I thought was disturbing because my verse was obviously much better than his. In a strictly classical poetic sense, his were modern mashups and train wrecks and disgusting, bloody, murderous scenes. Mine was more about longing and the human condition and where we're headed and the big picture.
But don't you think critics have a valid complaint when they say that that's the complete antithesis of what Spivey was trying to say in his poetry up until that point?
Well, the critics can go to hell. My plays say otherwise. I'm extremely successful. I've sold many plays to Hollywood, and I'm living high in the catbird seat. So, fuck off, critics. Do you have any other questions for me?
Just any final words on Al Russo?
Al was a beautiful young man. No, we never did it. Not for me, lack of trying, but he just wasn't into old playwrights. He was into young punk rockers. And later when he got sick, I felt compelled to take care of him, though he was like a son to me. We were friends. He was a decent lad. Underneath it all, he was morose and needy, like anyone else. But he had this violent outward appearance, and his poetry was so in your face and disgusting that people really couldn't see the child underneath. And why would they? They wanted blood. They wanted visceral action. They wanted disgusting American dreams. And he gave it to them.
On the next episode of Bullshit Artists.
Yeah, so he's crying in the corner, and I'm like, Dennis, what's the problem? And he's like, I think I got her pregnant.
Really? When did this happen?
Well, right after he ejaculated, I assume, eh?